Very good. Welcome, folks, to this Agile 20. What I forgot it's called, Agile 20 Reflect event. The long we've been going. Let me just bring up my slides. Got a few formalities just to go through, and then we'll get started. So yeah, Agile 20 Reflect. We're on week 4, so we're nearly at the end of the month. What a month it's been. With this slide slightly out of date now. We've got just over 800 events, which is absolutely astonishing. So an amazing response from the global community. As those of you probably know, if you've been on other events, we like to remind everyone that this festival was built entirely by volunteers with a global community. So it's been a truly collaborative global effort, and that's absolutely amazing. If you like to share on social, then we encourage you to do so. And we'd also be grateful if you would use our hashtag there in the bottom left. And of course, we have the website with lots of content about the festival, the event calendar, and the different teams that have been involved, etc. So there's lots of stuff there for you to look at if you like. And we've been supported and backed by a number of organisations who are at the top of that slide there. Moving on. As I say, it's a free festival. All of it's been built by volunteers, but should you wish to donate, you're welcome to do so, and there is an option on the website to allow you to do that. And every event in this festival is adhering to our community policy. In short, we simply ask that everybody is respectful to one another. We want everyone to have a great experience. And again, if you'd like to read that in more detail, you'll find it on the website. There's a link to it in the footer. And a nice little plug there at the end for the community policy. Sorry, not policy, for the event on the Sunday, which is not the close, but we are going to celebrate the month and all the events we've had, and celebrate the festival and everything it's meant to everyone and everybody who's been involved in the community, which we'll go on to talk about during this session, and look forward to the future. So that's on the Sunday, on the 28th, and it starts at 4 p.m. GMT. So that's the formalities. Right, we're delighted to be doing this session today, Shelby and I. We call it a Celtic collaboration. So it's Scotland and Wales coming together. Yeah, we're really looking forward to sharing our thoughts. We want to keep it fairly informal. We've got a few slides. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the history and some of the theory on communities and communities of practice, and then Shelby's going to do a lot of that, and I'm going to do some sort of real world example, some of the things we've been involved in, some of our learnings. And at the end, we'd like to have a good conversation about this festival, actually. So quite keen to hear your thoughts on that and have a nice sort of exploratory conversation. We don't intend to bore you with slides. We're quite chatty, so we like to converse and talk about, our passion, which is communities, and learn a little bit more about what it means to you. Before we do that, I think we're going to quickly just say a little bit about each other and introduce one another. So I think you're going to go first, aren't you?
I am absolutely over the moon and ecstatic to introduce my brother and close confidant and friend and fellow trustee who I've grown to love over the course of this festival. We've become really good friends. But this is Sathpal Singh. He is a technology leader, but he's more than that. He's a problem solver, a calmness in a storm of crazy. He is our strategy director. He's our operations manager. He is our wizard, our guru. He's somebody to go to solve all types of problems, and I certainly have appreciated that and fallen in love with that over the course of the festival. And I hope that our Celtic relationship carries on in the next God knows how many years.
I don't know how I could match that, to be honest. And given earlier in this festival, I did a talk on imposter syndrome. No, I'm really struggling.
Sorry.
So no, it's been wonderful working with Shelby. Shelby is in the day job. Shelby is an agile coach. She's an experienced practitioner. She's done a lot of great stuff in the agile space. She won an award some years ago. She were chatting a little bit about that earlier. And as Shelby says, you've really got to know her really well over the course of the festival. We've worked closely together on a number of initiatives. And it's been great to be a fellow trustee alongside Shelby. We've had lots of fun with the various aspects of bringing this festival together and working with the global community. It truly has been humbling and a really educational experience. Shelby's been tremendous in being part of the organisational circle. So what I mean by that is, I mentioned earlier a number of the organisations have supported us, and Shelby's been instrumental in collaborating with them and getting them on board and answering their questions and helping them understand what the festival's all about. And that's one of the things that Shelby's been doing. And alongside that, she just makes us smile and laugh and keeps us all going with our jokes. And yeah, we have a great time.
We do.
And we're here today really to share our passion on all things community, which is one of the things that brought us together. And also we decided that during the festival, we'd love to do a session together and talk about it. So that's what brings us here today. And I'm going to hand over to Shelby because she's going to start taking us through some of this detail.
Yeah, hello everyone. God, how do I follow that one, Sath? But thank you, bless you. Yeah, but what is a community of practice? And lots of people, you know, they don't really understand what a good community of practice actually physically is or means to them. But let's just give you the dictionary saying first, but then I'll go on to explain why it's more than that. So really, a community of practice is a group of people that come together with a shared concern or a passion for something. And actually, I'd like to say it's more of the passion for something. So it's something they do, something they learn about, and how to better interact with people on a regular cadence. The definition reflects fundamentally that by social nature of human beings, we like to learn as a collective. Whilst that's a very broad, explanation, that kind of gives you some context of what a good community practice is. In all cases of a good community practice, there are elements that belong to this. The elements are around mastery, purpose, autonomy, and the practice itself inside the domain of a community of practice. And they are generated by that collective group of people coming together to share a solid foundation of learning and sharing. So that's what essentially it is. Personally, for me, a community of practice is so much more. It's about learning. It's about my passions. It's about autonomy, mastery of my skill and trade. So I've been in quite a lot of communities practice, from Scrum Mastery to Dev community practice, and it helps me learn that trade. Shared knowledge, shared understanding, gives us a direct purpose, and really gives us autonomy then as the collective domain that it belongs to, so i.e. Scrum Mastery. So that is what a great community of practice is. You'd like to go to the next slide for me. So lots of characteristics of a good community of practice. You know, as I said, they're a collective of sense of purpose that gives us the ability to be together. We all share the same direction and flow and thinking around that purpose or topic. It's a focus on as I said, on the practice that we have. So whether that be Scrum Mastery, whether that be testing, and actually outside of Agile, it can be photography, sewing, knitting, reading books, astronomy, and so forth and so on. So it's about that shared focus of a practice. It's dedicated on a specific domain. So as I just said, I've seen lots of communities of practice set up around, there's one currently for the NHS Test and Track app. They are in the group trying to understand what the app does and how it's broken down, what it means, how the technology's gone into it. And they just generally are trying to find a common purpose of why that app was brought about. It's informal in structure. There's no hierarchical positioning inside a great community of practice. None of us are better than anybody else. We are just as good as. And so inside there, you are given that autonomy to come forward with whatever information, session, reading, book, conference you've gone to share with inside that community practice. And it's a get together. It's a get together over an agreed cadence of time. And this is why they kind of probably sit well in the work domain, because you do have a nice cadence that you can get them in regularly, weekly, if your business allows it, but also outside of work. And actually, we actually sit in one when you join Meetup. Meetup has got a nice cadence. You see it, you go in, you log into a group, that's the domain. and then it sets up a cadence of events or talks or things that happen throughout the month. So that's a nice cadence, but you can master that as you set your own community practice up. And then obviously the most important characteristic of that community practice is learning. I think I have learned more from my fellow community practitioners than I have done by reading books and sometimes going on courses, because it's a constant and we all come from a different perspective. And so there are some of the great characteristics of a great community of practice. Now, this is I love this slide. Couple of reasons and I come to talk about it. So lots of people actually naturally just assume that communities of practice have been a really new kind of a venture. They kind of associate it with the likes of Etienne Wenger, who in 1991 with Jean I always pronounce the name wrong, Lev, did some research on a passion of theirs. They kind of set up, they were in a participation of a theory, and this is where I need to make sure that I'm doing my facts, a concept of learning within inside communities. And it was a social sort of learning session that they decided how they come up with the coined community of practice. However, history dictates that he is actually not the person, and they are not the people that actually founded communities of practice. History, if the more you look into social learning and what a good community of practice is, you will actually find that there was a lovely gentleman. Well, I won't lie. There is the case is out for this, but there was a gentleman called Albert Bandura who conducted a series of experiments on observational learning, collectively known now today as the Bobo doll experiments. He did a couple of experiments in the early 1960s where he'd experimented with children in controlled environments to study their social behaviours and how they can be acquired or observed by imitation and inside a different social kind of group. And he did lots of good, what I would have said is good work on putting those children into different rooms to see how they learn together. And so actually, he probably was one of the earliest people to coin what a good, great community practice is. And as I've studied it a lot more, we can actually probably go back to the Knights Templar and followers of Jesus and other crusades. And actually, because those people were after a certain sort of learning or type of learning. So it goes back hundreds and thousands of years, but really it's become popular I think it was around about 1991 with Etienne, and then as we've gone into the Agile realm, it becomes more and more popular and you hear it more and more inside places of work. So lots of people hear about communities practice and think that these are things that are dictated back to and you're told to join them because you're agile. And actually I kind of want to dispel a couple of myths. So here's what I put. They're not run by your management team. They're run by you and everybody that has the same purpose or shared feeling or passion. They're not used as a tool to criticize you. So what I mean by that is just because you are not at the level, let's say, of mastery, if you haven't been a Scrum Master for 5-6 years, that doesn't mean your knowledge or whatever you've learned is as bad or as better than the Scrum Master that's only been doing it for a year, because I think you can learn from loads of different individuals. The other thing is that when it goes into businesses, sometimes management make it mandatory and that you have to attend. And actually that really bucks the trend, because it shouldn't be mandatory, because we should never enforce our views, our training, our passions onto other people, because they're ours and our biases. So we should let that cultivate and be born from the passion that we all share. It's not a certification practice. It doesn't mean that if you attend 15 of these sessions, you automatically get a nice big shiny badge and that you become certified in running community practice. Again, it is about a purpose. It's about a common understanding and sharing. And it's not led just by one person. It's run by the whole of the community. Hence, it says community is a practice on the tin. And then it's not dictation over participation. So it would never be me coming into a community and practice and telling you that you've got to do my passion this way. I would, and I'm pointing my finger here because you can see that that's dictation to somebody, and it should never be like that. It should be an open forum for you to come express your views and feel like that you've learned something, taken something away, and that you're also free and safe, psychologically safe, to share your experiences with everybody in that community. So I think it's now over to our lovely Sath, who will talk to you nicely now about leading and running a community of practice.
I'll unmute myself, shall I? Yeah, so I think that's some of the background and the kind of characteristics of what a community practice typically looks like. And as Shelby says, they're informal groups, they're informal constructs. There's no formality around them. You can't force people to attend what would ultimately become a good community of practice. So that's one of the key things that I think if you're new to them, it's worth bearing in mind. There's no formal authority around them. So one of the things I'm really kind of interested in is the idea of how you lead these and how would you really run a community of practice. Now, again, the term can be quite formal. So I think we were saying at the start, people run meetup groups. So I've got I'm part of a meetup group that I run, and Donald, my co-organizer, he's on this call. So that's a form of community practice, but it's that sense of common shared purpose that brings people together. And don't worry, we're not going to be talking about an English rock band from the 60s, but the idea of who is important, both from the sense of who are well placed to lead them and create them and run them, but also who would attend them. So Shelby's done a good job of kind of setting the scene around who might attend them, and it is typically purpose that brings people together. So in my organization, where I work in the day job, I work in a bank. There are lots and lots of communities of practice. Like there's communities of practice for pretty much anything and everything. So Shelby mentioned a few on the agile side. I work in the sort of technology domain in my org, within the engineering space, and there are communities of practice for the infrastructure as code, DevOps, technology leadership, you name it. The list goes on and on. I think there's about 35 communities of practice, so that's quite a lot. But the leadership aspect of communities of practice is actually really critical to community of practice being successful. So what I mean by that, so we talked earlier about them not being mandatory, but also they're not going to be led through authority, because communities of practice are informal. You don't lead communities of practice with authority. It's not a formal leadership construct. It's much more of a social leadership idea. So the best communities of practice run by those who actually exhibit social leadership behaviors and characteristics. So there I've got a little kind of logo there you can see there, and this is a little kind of screenshot of something called the NET model, which is actually a model around social leadership. It's created by a wonderful chap called Julian Stodd, who's actually spoken at the meetup that Donald and I run. And what Julian specializes in, he's a kind of thought leader in storytelling and social leadership, community building. And the whole point really is if you're going to create a community of practice, there needs to be a sort of clear sense of purpose. Why should that community of practice exist? What need are you trying to meet? Because by creating such a thing, it's all about, so those of us who are practicing agile practitioners understand the idea of servant leadership. And it's no different in the sense of running a COP, because what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to best serve the needs of your community. And typically their need will be probably to fill some sort of skills gap. So, but what you also want to do is ensure that the way that community of practice is led and run meets those needs. So thinking about the type of sessions, the format of sessions, Shelby talked earlier about the cadence, how often should they be? And as you run one, you've got to think about how you're going to nurture that community. So communities that ultimately will be self-sustaining, which is actually what you're trying to do, and continue to grow, are only going to do so through what I believe is the adoption of this type of net model. So focus on the narrative. So what is the story? What's the purpose? What are you trying to do, and how do you get that across? Engagement is really key, because those who attend a community or are part of a community, they come because they feel part of it. So they feel part of it through the engagement that they get, the engagement that they feel, whether it's anything from the welcome that they get to the follow-up kind of communications. How do they understand what's coming up? All these things are critical. And those who do attend COPs do tend to fall into different categories. So something you will experience if you're on meetups is you'll have that kind of core group. So those who kind of attend all of the sessions, are always there, are very active participants. But then you'll also have those who are kind of much more kind of passive. They maybe come to certain sessions because those topics are of greater interest to them. Or those that are even less sort of active, they attend, but they don't participate. So obviously we're currently in a very sort of virtual kind of world. And if you attend even some of these sessions that we've been running over the course of this month, there's lots of people who join these calls and they never switch their camera on, because they're there, they're attending, they're participating, but it's very passive. And that's the way they prefer it. So it is deliberately an open, safe space. And you have to kind of respect how people want to engage with your practice and your community. And that's kind of key part of that. These ingredients are things that really need to be thought about deeply if you're going to build a sustaining community of practice, one that's going to go on and last and see a growing community. And the community will grow because they both feel welcome, and there's good communication around it, and it is serving their need. So I think that's quite important. So this is just a few kind of little lessons I kind of picked up and learned last year, actually. So it's, as I said, in my organization, we have lots of communities of practice for lots of different subjects. And I helped launch my organization's DevOps community of practice. Now, that was quite interesting, because DevOps is, for those of you who know, is like a very big, broad technical subject, bringing together sort of, traditional developers and software guys with those who manage the operations and trying to improve collaboration. Although it's not new, there's still lots of organizations who are trying to figure out how to effectively do good DevOps adoption. So a few of us felt it was really, really important to try to bring people together so we could create that sense of community and actually help one another learn. So Shelby talked earlier about when you're at community practice, you actually learn a lot more than you might learn by going in courses. We learn a lot from one another. That's the point, isn't it? But I think, again, clarity on motive is important, and clarity on what you're trying to do. So in this particular COP, we were actually trying to bring engineers and technology professionals from across quite a large organization, like 70,000 people, together to actually figure out, well, how do we move forward in this maturity journey? So that was the kind of motivation for it. But it's very important to be clear on that. And it took us a bit of time to figure out how best to position that. And that's also where the communication comes in, because if you're not clear on that, people will be confused about whether they ought to be there or not. Is it going to meet their needs? Is it going to serve their needs? And you do also need to plan ahead. So if you're going to launch a COP, you're not just going to launch it and go, ta-da, we've launched a COP. You need to be thinking about where you intend it to go. What's the strategy for it? How do you see it evolving? And how are you going to continue to nurture the community and make sure that whatever you're doing within whatever cadence you've got? So it's typical for COP, especially within organizations, to perhaps run a session once a month, or in some cases, maybe once a quarter. But to actually have some sort of plan ahead around what's coming up, what sort of sessions you're going to cover, and how are you going to speak to the audience, because you should be building up a good understanding of what they're actually interested in. So asking them frequently, is it meeting their needs? Is it serving their needs? How are you supporting them? And are you doing that effectively enough is a really important part of that engagement and that sense of community. Because everybody has a voice, everybody has that opportunity to participate. And it comes back to the leadership. Anyone can run one, but the best leaders of communities of practice tend to be those who exhibit strong social leadership behaviours. So ones who have high social capital is something we often say. So, they exhibit servant leadership, they exhibit a lot of humility, they're very inclusive, they believe in equality, all that stuff. So they kind of really focus on flat structure. And that's really important in those types of groups. And size is kind of important to think about as well. And it seems funny that I'm mentioning it, but when we launched that particular community of practice, because there's such a huge sort of technology population within within my organization, we kind of overlooked to kind of restrict the group. So I was actually going to launch this and run a virtual lean coffee to actually get those who attended to give us their view and democratically agree the purpose of the COP, and also try to collaboratively put forward a plan of what sort of things this COP should be covering. But over 400 people signed up. Now, you can't, anybody who's ever ran a lead coffee knows that you can't run a meaningful lead coffee with hundreds of people. So we kind of overlooked this. And when I went to look at the registrations, because other members of the group were looking after that, I was a bit shocked. And I thought, how do we do this? In the end, thankfully, only 250 people turned up, but it was still a big number. And really what we ended up having to do was try to do something where we used a tool called Lean Coffee Table. Some of you might know it. And then we tried to get from those who attended some ideas of the kind of things they wanted us to cover. We populated the board with that. And then in the second half of the session, we started to delve more deeply into conversations around what are the challenges? Why are we all here? How do we make this worthwhile for everyone? How do we make it work? But engaging everyone in that conversation was key. But think about the size of the group. Think about how to facilitate the session. What format's best? What sort of tools and techniques do you want to use? What technology do you need to have in place to support the group? Because if you're going to have large communities of practice, that takes a lot of effort to facilitate for a group of that size. And as I think we said earlier, you've got to continue to engage. So that one's still kind of large community of practice. It's growing, but for people to continue to want to be involved, you've got to keep communicating. That narrative is important. That ongoing engagement is really important. And that's something you got to work at. You've got to keep doing it. You can't half-heartedly do it. Otherwise, over a period of time, your community will diminish. They won't see any value from that. And they will stop wanting to be part of that community because it doesn't serve their need. So just some things that I've learned over the last few years of doing meetups and launching some quite large COPs and being part of other COPs and watching how other people run them. And there's no right or wrong. People do them differently, but those are some of the success criteria. And the last thing before we kind of just open up to yourselves for a conversation is, well, it's probably worth touching on this very festival. So the Agile 20 Reflect is a global community. Many of us came together from across the world as volunteers to create something which was going to bring people together, bring us together to collectively mark and celebrate the 20th anniversary of the original signing of the manifesto. But actually, in reality, what we were trying to do and what we have done and what we hope to continue to do is build a community, a supportive community, a community that is focused on sharing and learning and supporting one another. And a lot of it's about building bridges. So part of what we tried to do was bring different communities together. It's been for us a humbling experience to see communities joining us from Africa and South America and Australasia and Asia, Russia, India, coming together because it's that common sense of purpose around Agile that has brought us together. So for us, it feels like it is a huge community of practice around Agile, but there's so many different dimensions to that. But we'd be quite keen and interested to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree? what do you feel that the Agile 20 Reflect Festival actually is? But that sense of community we felt has come through really strongly. And over it, many of us have actually built some amazing bridges with communities across the global Agile community, which has been absolutely tremendous for us. And that shared sense of learning as well. All of us have learned. I've been to so many sessions and learned so much stuff about so many aspects and dimensions of Agile because it's such a diverse, broad subject. But we thought we couldn't really share our passion for communities of practice and communities in general without touching on this very festival, which at the outset, the idea was to connect the entire Agile global community. And I think with that, I think that's all that Shelby and I wanted to really cover off. But we definitely wanted to have 20 minutes or so to open it up for questions. So I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see everyone. And yeah, we're happy to field any questions. We're keen to hear what you think.
I'm happy to say something. So if only I'd met you guys like 8 months ago before I tried to set up a community of practice. It would have been so useful. So we've got a platform lead that's very, very passionate about communities of practice. So he's set it up very formally. So I'm lucky that 60 to 80% of my time is paid for by the organization to run that community of practice. So I think I'm very lucky to have that time because it takes a lot of time and effort. And I have a co-chair that has 20 to 40% of her time is dedicated to helping me. But it's been great. It's been growing organically for the last 5-6 months. And we've gone from one platform to we've just been accelerated into being the global Agile and Scrum community of practice. But I could have done with some hints and tips, I think, to take us on the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of I think like we were touching on that the thing with communities of practice is it's that real human element. It's people come together and communities are only communities because people feel like they're part of something. So when you did your when you launched yours, then I mean, did some of what we touched on resonate in terms of lessons, things to think about? What sort of challenges did you feel you faced?
Well, I was very scared because it was like I'm kind of being paid to do it. I've got to make it successful.
Right. Yeah.
And anyone else that wants to come along for the journey is doing it as part of their day job. So they've got to want to do it. But the company's been trying to sort of say to everybody, use 10% of your time for self-growth, having that growth mindset. And that can include anything you want to do around communities of practice.
I love that.
They're not sure people are engaged enough. So now they're setting it as an objective in their PDPs.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome.
Oh, okay.
So they've gone too far now. I think they meant...
I think the intention is there. Is that what you're trying to say, Judy?
I think the intention is right, but it's misguided. What they're saying is we are giving you permission by setting it as an objective for you. If that makes sense, because then you can turn around to say to people, you're not delivering, you're not giving 100%. You can say, but I have a personal objective set by my senior leadership that I have to spend 10% of my time on my own personal growth. It's an interesting dilemma, right?
Yeah.
And I've been
Solly, you look like you want to say something. Sorry. Is this in support of what Judy's saying?
Yes, I can comment on every single thing that you said. My veins run by communities, so I love to create communities, and I've been through different communities inside corporation and around the globe, creating more people communities, right? That's one of the big difference. And I wanted to ask you, because I think that I just wrote down 2 of the most challenging things that I came across when working inside a big organization that tried to build community of practice. I'm not even getting into the technical one. Just let's talk about the agile kind of one, community of practice or whatever it is. The busyness of the people, even when they say you have to spend 10% of your time, the busyness that my manager doesn't give me the time to come, right? I don't have the time to come because of the many hats. Like, you know, all these big transformations when they're still in that change that is need to change not only the way they work, the way they think. So there are a lot of things to grow, and they think that the community of practice end up being like the shrink area, right? When you go there and share your frustrations, and when you can go because of this busyness. And then something that you mentioned that is super important for me is to have an agenda and where you go to go, because over time the engagement may decrease. Like, I'm coming here, but I'm wasting my time because I'm not interested in what we're talking about. Like, it's a very valuable space, but we are not getting the best out of it. And so all these things, these two different things, the business and the engagement over time, are two of for me, the biggest challenges that I came across. So I want to hear your
so I've worked into Julie's point, I've worked in an organization that has actually allowed me to you know, it's a day job, you have to go do it. We had 2 days of self-learning, and one of those days had to be dedicated to community practice. And I used to, I mean, take 1,000 people off site and run a whole day on community practice. In the morning, it was around us gathering our backlog, talking about things we've done and learn, and almost on an in-house session. And in the afternoon, the pivot that I said to them was, well, actually, what you've learned or what you have got on your backlog, I now need you to spread it to the rest of the organisation. So whoever was at that event, I would say in the afternoon, you should stop working at your domain and go to the other domain to go learn something, because that's the purpose. So, and then the flip side of that then is an organisation that wants to do it and then says to you, well, where's the bang for my buck? What's the value to me? What am I doing? And actually, you can quantify it, right? You cannot probably quantify it by value in monetary terms, but value in having T-shaped people, cross-learning, cross-functional teams, having them learn around a number of different factors that help you with your agility journey has a benefit to it. So you can put a case towards the value of it because of the learning and in-house learning. So you could almost equate some cost to not sending them out on a course. So you can equate it to some kind of value. So you have that. Then the other one is about the sustainability of it and how it grows. You will get times where you will sit in a room by yourself and nobody will turn up, and that's really hard. And then you have to really look about how you talk about it, how you radiate it out. Is it working? Are we given the right, you know, we all like feedback, so go and get feedback, put your feedback loops out, ask them what wasn't working for you, why wasn't it working for you, and then pivot, change tack. You know, I've had some community practices where it was literally just people coming in a room and just talking, and then they fell away, and I was like, they were like, well, we've done talking. I was like, okay, let's go read book, come back and tell me what the book said, go to a conference, come back and download the conference to us. Did you do training? Come and give a training in-house for us. So and then you can also then attach that back to that value stream, right? So you can build on those layers. It does need a sustainable pace. Don't force it. Don't, you know, say it's every week. When you first start, do it monthly, but really find your champions as well, so that you can get, and same to you, Judy, get your champions, because they are the people that are going to shout it for you. They're the people that are going to help you travel on your bus and take you further. Sath?
Yes.
Sorry, Sol.
Yes, I did. Sath, anything to add?
No, I was reflecting on what you were saying, Sully, and you were talking about engagement, and the thing we touched on at the start was a COP does tend to have some sort of specialist focus. So you operate within a domain, and the people who launch the COPs and run the COPs tend to be passionate about things within that domain. So with that, they would typically and should be looking further ahead around what's coming up, what are the hot topics in this particular domain. So when I talked about DevOps, so in my org, I work in a bank, we launched that. There's lots of things going on regards DevOps. and the team. So I help launch it, but I'm not in the DevOps Center of Excellence, for example, but I'm passionate about community, and they asked me to come and help them get this off the ground. So we've done that. But what they're now doing is they're regularly sort of running sessions and speaking to topics and themes that are very relevant to their community. That's where the engagement comes from. It's even the same with meetups. I think said earlier, so you've been on some of the future work meetups. The ideas are similar, right? Donald's on the call, he's my co-organizer. And when we're thinking about what we want to do by way of sessions, we're thinking about, well, how do we serve the needs of our community? I talked earlier about social leadership. To me, that's at the heart of it, and that's the bit I'm really passionate about, because really good social leaders are few and far between, but they actually come from a position of wanting to serve their community. And I think that's a really important bit, but also the practice bit can't be overlooked. So, you know, if you're part of a COP that's for product owners, if it's going to be successful, the product owners will come because they're learning things about how to improve their practice as a PO. And if they get that, they'll keep coming back because that's where the value is. So I think that's the value add piece. But Judy, I was a little bit intrigued by what you were saying, because some of what you described to me felt a little bit like it was too much within the domain of formality, like it was kind of being forced. And if it's people are putting pressure on you to achieve certain things, I'd be great. I'd be keen to hear more, but I tend to find they're the sort of COPs that don't work so well.
I want to emphasize that.
Sorry.
Judy, go on.
No, so you go on.
There depends on how the COP is born, because I have different my 2 or 3 of my latest clients 1 year ago were in this kind of thing. Like they have to, like the famous guild, right? Of like they have to have it. And they all sit together on the table and they look at each other and say, yes, we have to be here because somebody says that we need to have a 10% of our time, but we have to be here. And that's where the organization comes across. And even when the people are willing to learn, and of course there's somebody that is the leader of the guild or the chapter lead or whatever. They have also many different names I came across apart from that. And maybe it's not the right person, but it's a manager that they change roles into that. So when you said, look for the champions, sometimes because I've been there, I've been coaching these people, like where the wrong person is in the seat of the leader, and the real one want to share the knowledge and to drive the agenda are sitting at the table, and how that can friction, because he's still my boss at the end of the day, and I have to report to him. And you know what I mean? When the organization come across.
And people by default, Sol, will naturally feel forced. And there's, yourself. I mean, if somebody tells me to do something, I often buck the trend because they're telling me, and from that, then I get nothing. There's nothing. You've got no participation from me. I will shut down. There'd be nothing from me. So to not have it mandated or not to be enforced on people is the way you help with that social connection and the drive and the passion behind it, because you have those people that share that common sense of mastery or purpose or want to know about the domain because they share that passion. It's inside them. They want to learn about it, and so because they want to learn about it, they'll come back time and time again, right? And there's never a truer saying. It's you can start that spark, but and hope it leads to a flame, right? Which is like, it resonates so well with me and Sath, because this is something like from this community that's like happening in the background that many of you might not see, but that's what it's about. If your manager's there and it's forced on you, if you're anything like me, I'm like, I've got a dentist appointment, or I'm going somewhere, you know, and I will never go. But because it should never be driven or born from that fear aspect.
Yeah.
So
Go on.
Because you were saying, you know, you'd expect it maybe to fail because it was born out of formality. It hasn't, and it's quite remarkable.
That's good.
So we have 9 platforms. We maybe have 11 platforms now, and it was born out of one particular platform. And we started off with, we have Agile champions. They're the guys that help me. And more than half of them were not from our platform.
Wow.
And that's how it's grown organically. So it's just grown because people are, I guess, passionate, and they are getting something out of the community of practice. So they're happy to.
And is it across the org?
It's now going across the org, yes. So
because the reason I ask and bring that up is the value of COPs within organizations is one of the real benefits is they break down silos, right?
Yes.
So if an organization has a COP for anything, so as I say, in my org, there's lots of COPs. People come across the typical kind of not imaginary, but the boundaries that exist across the departments and the domains, the franchises, whatever terminology is used within your own organizational structures. But the COPs bring them together. And that's one of the things that I love about communities of practice is they do break down silos and they get people working together who traditionally would not have any other forum by which to actually connect.
Yeah.
And for me, a lot of it's about connection. That's what it does. And that's where I think it's really valuable within organizations, especially both supporting learning, but building connections and breaking down silos. Yeah.
And actually, you can sorry, Judy, but you can flip it on the other side, because why I fell in love with community practices is because I've always been in one since a child. You know, big Italian family, lots of aunties, lots of nonnas, community, you know, we all cook together. So I learned the passion for cooking. I went and joined, my dad was the armed forces, so I had lots of army aunties and uncles. I joined the army. That's a community. I came out of that. I went into organising events. That's a different community. You by default, you will go into schools and fall into communities. Your social circle is a community. Through your industry career, you will fall into one. I picked it up and run with it, so much so when I fell into Agile, that the essence of that, because it resonated so deeply within my core, is why I absolutely, well, I mean, I'd talk about it all night long if I had my way, but we don't have time. But yeah, it's, you've got to have that community, you know, that passion, the community there, the learning, understand that shared value, and sell it that way. That's a big sell to organizations, especially with bosses that are, you know, asking you for the value to give you, you know, give back to them. Well, I can tell you a number, 100 reasons. Can't tell you monetary, but I can tell you another 100 reasons of why this is a benefit to your organization.
Hi, Sath.
Hi, Mercy.
Hi, Shelby.
Hi, Mercy.
Sorry, I can't turn on my camera.
It's all right.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for sharing. So I'm actually curious, your lean coffee, how did it turn out with the 250 in attendance? How was it?
Good question. It actually ended up being really good. So at the start, we'd ask people to put forward, like you do in a typical sort of lean coffee environment, you want to democratize the agenda. So we're asking people, what do you want to talk about? But the actual problem, the reason I brought up technology is the technical problem we had was because so many people actually turned up, we ended up breaking the Lean Coffee website because everybody piled into it to basically add their own items onto the agenda and then vote on things. Basically, it crashed the site. So we had to kind of work around that. So then during the session, we switched to kind of using the chat and tried other means. So when I talked earlier about the net model with the narrative, the engagement, and the technology, you do have to think really hard about what tech's best going to work. And I think that's something we see now in all these virtual meetups that we do in conferences. You know, people are using the Zoom breakouts. They've got, you know, little polls that they're launching from Zoom or Slido, or, you know, maybe they've got people collaborating in Mural. That's the landscape we're in now, but you do have to think quite carefully about the combination of technology you want to use to best facilitate the conversations. So yeah, it needs a lot of thought. Oh, there's Lindsay now, right?
Oh, right at the very end. She's a fellow lady that loves community practice. I just as much as me and Sath. And when she gave a talk previously, I actually cried. That just tells you how much she's fantastic.
So we're gonna run out of time, but I'm delighted Lindsay's just jumped on. Lindsay actually runs the Agile Community practice where we work. So Lindsay and our colleagues, and she does a fantastic job. And we were talking earlier about engagement and how you could have a really good cadence around keeping your community engaged. And that's what Lindsay does. And she does a fabulous job, but she's such a strong communicator. And I was talking earlier about social leadership and social leaders, and that's how I view Lindsay. So Lindsay to me is a great example of a social leader. And there she's come on there now. And that's the key ingredient. It's all right. Were you planning a future COP session or something? Were you?
No, nothing as exciting. Just family stuff. So I will watch back. But lovely part to come in at, Sath. Thank you.
It's all right. No, we're just wrapping up, unfortunately. But we've talked. Obviously, you can catch up with the recording, but we've talked a lot about the kind of the social aspect, because that's key to it. That's absolutely key to it, and that's why I'm intrigued when people are kind of forced to go, or somebody says, oh, we need to start that. Because when we did the one that I talked about, and Lindsay knows, because Lindsay remembers, I was talking about when we launched the DevOps COP, Lindsay. So Lindsay remembers the numbers that we had and some of the technical challenges we faced, all this stuff. But, a group of us came to the realization that the organization needed something like this to bring the relevant practitioners together to share and to learn. And you've got to have a strong purpose, so strong vision, strong purpose, and you've also got to have, I would say, a lot of tenacity to keep working away to make a COP successful. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time, and I'm a big fan of the idea of nurture. You have to nurture these things, and it's the same with what we're doing on this. I mean, it would be nice to have spoken a little bit more about the festival and get your thoughts on that. Unfortunately, this session's only an hour, but you're welcome to reach out to Shelby and myself. You can reach us on LinkedIn or whatever channel you prefer. I'm always happy to answer questions. And yeah, we're delighted to have done this session, because we're both very passionate about community. And there's still a few days to go. There's still a whole bunch of events, so I hope you'll find something else that's of interest to you. And don't forget, we've got the event on the Sunday where we're going to celebrate the month that's come and gone. So hopefully see some of you there. And thanks for joining. And thanks to Shelby, my wonderful co-host and speaker for this session. And I hope you enjoyed it. And do give us feedback, guys. We'll send you the link in the meetup.
Mention Lindsay's community again. I'd like to join it, please. Or Lindsay, can you share the link, please?
Yeah, definitely, my lovely. I will do. I'll reach out to you, Mercy, my love.
Thank you so much, Shelby.
That's okay, honey.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your time.
Hello, Sathpal.
Hi, Alberto.
Hi, Alberto.
I listened in. A great session. So much to learn, takeaways, and the effort. I really love where you said you started computer practice when you were small. So I love that perspective, and it just gives us the flexibility of mindset to conceptualize what the COP is all about. Thanks for sharing your experience, and Sathpal.
You're welcome, Alberto.
Great job, guys. Well done.
Thank you.
And actually, just while you're all still on, Alberto and I are doing a session together on Saturday. So if you're about and you want to join that, do feel free to come along. You're very welcome. And I'll actually be Alberto's guest for that session, so you'll have a chance to hear a little bit more about me and my own journey and some of the things that I've been involved in. And yeah, Alberto's actually a regular attendee and participant at the meetup that Donald and I organise, and it's been great to connect with him. He's based in Nigeria, so yeah, we'll have a few stories. I don't know what he's going to ask me yet, so we'll have to see how that goes.
No.
But I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Brilliant. Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much, Sathpal.
Thanks, Alberto.
Thank you,
I
guys.
just